Those were the last words Sarah heard before the dying captain's hand fell from the controls. 30 seconds ago, she was just a passenger reading a book in seat 21A. Now she was the only person who could save 312 lives aboard a crippled Boeing 777 with no engines, no hydraulics, and collapsing landing gear screaming toward Earth at 400 miles per hour. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Boeing 777 gleamed under the afternoon sun at Chicago O'Hare as passengers filed through gate C-19. Among them walked Sarah Mitchell, a woman in her late 30s wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and worn running shoes. She carried a backpack and a paperback novel, looking exactly like thousands of other travelers passing through the airport that day. The flight attendant at the aircraft door gave her the same professional smile she offered everyone else, barely glancing at her boarding pass before gesturing toward the economy cabin. Sarah found row 21 on the left side and settled into seat 21A by the window. The man in the middle seat was absorbed in his laptop and offered only a distracted grunt when she excused herself to reach her spot. She buckled her seatbelt, opened her novel, and disappeared into the story as the cabin filled around her. Nobody looked at her twice. The flight attendants moved through their routines without giving her special attention. To them, she was just another passenger traveling alone, content to read quietly. The woman across the aisle made idle conversation, asking if Sarah had been to London before. Sarah replied pleasantly that she had visited a few times, keeping her answers short. When asked what she did for work, Sarah smiled and said she was between jobs, which satisfied the woman's curiosity and ended the conversation. What nobody aboard could have guessed was that Sarah Mitchell had spent 15 years mastering one of the most demanding professions on Earth. She had graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy, earned her wings flying C-17 Globemasters, and later transitioned to fighters with over 800 hours in F-16 Fighting Falcons. After leaving active duty, she had been hired by a major airline and quickly advanced to captain, flying wide-body aircraft across oceans. She had also served as a Boeing test pilot, evaluating new aircraft systems and pushing experimental planes to their limits at 40,000 feet. She had trained other pilots in emergency procedures, throwing every conceivable malfunction at them in simulators. She knew the Boeing 777 inside and out, could recite its systems from memory, understood its flight characteristics better than most people understood their own cars. But today she was flying as a passenger, taking a vacation to visit a friend in London. She had deliberately chosen to leave her professional identity behind. She wore no uniform, carried no flight bag, displayed nothing that would identify her as a pilot. She simply wanted to sit in seat 21A, read her book, and let someone else handle the flying. The anonymity felt comfortable, liberating. For the next 7 hours, she could be nobody special. Flight 447 pushed back right on schedule. Sarah felt the familiar sensation as they taxied toward the runway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional and reassuring, announcing they were number 3 for departure. His voice sounded experienced, confident. Sarah returned to her novel as the aircraft turned onto the runway. The engine spooled up and they accelerated down the concrete, the nose lifting, Chicago dropping away beneath them. The landing gear retracted with a solid thump and they banked gently, climbing through 10,000 feet. The first 2 hours passed uneventfully. The aircraft leveled at 39,000 feet, cruising smoothly over Ohio and Pennsylvania. Flight attendants served drinks and meals. Sarah accepted ginger ale and chicken pasta, making small talk with the accountant in the middle seat who was traveling to a conference. He complained about airline food and asked if she flew often. She said occasionally, for pleasure mostly, nothing exciting. The conversation died and they both returned to their activities. Sarah was halfway through chapter 12 when she felt it. A subtle change in the engine sound, barely perceptible but instantly recognizable to someone with her training. The steady drone shifted slightly, one engine running just a fraction rougher than it should. She looked up, listening carefully. The sound normalized. Probably nothing, she thought. Maybe a fuel flow fluctuation or sensor glitch. She returned to reading, though now her attention was divided. 10 minutes later, the change came again, more pronounced. The engine note dropped and she felt a slight yaw to the left as thrust decreased. Other passengers noticed too, looking around with confused expressions. The seatbelt sign illuminated and the captain's voice returned, still calm but with an edge Sarah detected immediately. "Folks, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our engines. We're going to divert to Pittsburgh for a precautionary landing. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." Sarah's trained mind ran through possibilities. Engine problems on a 777 were rare but manageable. The aircraft could fly on one engine if necessary. A divert to Pittsburgh made sense. She felt the aircraft beginning descent, the nose dropping slightly. Through her window she saw they were turning south toward Pennsylvania. Then everything went wrong. A massive vibration shook the entire aircraft, so violent that overhead bins popped open and luggage tumbled into the aisle. Passengers screamed as the plane yawed hard left, the deck tilting at a sickening angle. Sarah grabbed her armrests, automatically bracing. Through the window she saw flames trailing from the left engine, bright orange fire streaming along the wing. The engine had come apart, shredding itself in catastrophic failure. The vibration stopped suddenly as the engine tore free from its mounting and fell away. But the damage was done. Warning alarms blared from the cockpit. The aircraft was wounded badly, flying on one engine with unknown structural damage. The cabin pressure changed suddenly, making Sarah's ears pop painfully. Then came the rushing roar of wind. Explosive decompression. The shrapnel had punched holes through the fuselage, and now the aircraft was bleeding atmosphere at 39,000 feet. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swinging wildly. Sarah grabbed hers and pulled it over her face, breathing deeply to fight off hypoxia. Around her, passengers fumbled with masks, some panicking. The man next to her was struggling, fingers shaking. Sarah reached over and helped him secure it properly. He nodded gratefully, eyes wide with terror. The aircraft descended rapidly, the pilots executing an emergency descent to get below 10,000 feet where passengers could breathe without oxygen. Sarah felt the G-forces pushing her into her seat. The rushing wind grew louder. Items were being sucked toward the breeches, papers and cups swirling through the cabin. A purse flew past Sarah's head and disappeared aft. Flight attendants were strapped in their jump seats, unable to move during the violent descent. Sarah's mind analyzed the situation with cold precision. Uncontained engine failure, explosive decompression, structural damage, possible damage to flight controls. The aircraft was still flying, still responding, which meant hydraulics were at least partially functional. But they were in serious trouble. She could feel it in the way the aircraft handled, a sluggishness suggesting damaged control surfaces or a fuel leak. The descent seemed endless but took less than 3 minutes. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. Finally they leveled at 8,000 feet. The rushing wind diminished but didn't stop. They were still losing pressure but at this altitude it was survivable. Sarah removed her oxygen mask and took a deep breath. The captain's voice returned, but different now. Strained. Struggling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious emergency. We're declaring Mayday and attempting emergency landing at Pittsburgh. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing." Something in his voice told Sarah the cockpit situation was even worse than she imagined. The professional veneer was cracking, replaced by something that sounded like pain. She unbuckled, trusting her instincts. The nearest flight attendant, a young woman named Jennifer, looked alarmed. "Ma'am, you need to remain seated." "I'm a pilot," Sarah said quietly. "ATP rated, 777 type rating, former military. Something's wrong in the cockpit. I can hear it." Jennifer's eyes widened. She seemed frozen, processing this information, deciding if Sarah was credible. Then training kicked in. "Wait here," she said, unbuckling and moving toward the forward galley. Sarah watched her disappear through the curtain separating economy from business class. 3 minutes passed. Jennifer reappeared with the senior flight attendant, an older woman with gray hair and 30 years of experience. She approached Sarah urgently. "You're a pilot. Current on type?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Airline captain, retired Air Force, test pilot experience." "I know this aircraft. What's happening up front?" The senior flight attendant leaned close. "The first officer is unconscious. Something hit him when the engine exploded. The captain is injured, bleeding badly from his abdomen, fading fast. He's trying to fly but can barely stay conscious. We need help. We need a pilot." Ice water flooded Sarah's veins. 2 pilots down. A critically damaged aircraft. Hundreds of lives depending on someone getting this plane onto the ground. "Take me to the cockpit. Now." They moved forward through the cabin, past rows of terrified passengers, through business class, to the cockpit door. The flight attendant unlocked it and pushed it open. Sarah stepped through and immediately assessed the scene. The cockpit was a disaster. The right windscreen had a spiderweb crack and a small hole where something had punched through. The first officer slumped in his seat, blood running down his face, breathing but unconscious. The captain in the left seat was worse. His shirt was soaked with blood on the left side, one hand pressed against his abdomen while the other gripped the yoke with desperate strength. His face was gray and slick with sweat. He turned his head when Sarah entered, recognition in his eyes that he was dying. "Need help," he gasped. "Can't hold on. Controls damaged, hydraulics failing, losing fuel from the left wing." He coughed and blood appeared on his lips. "Who are you?" "Sarah Mitchell, captain qualified on this type, former Air Force, test pilot background," Sarah said quickly, moving between the pilot's seats where she could see the instruments. Her eyes scanned the displays, taking in the cascading failures. Both hydraulic systems showing low pressure, left fuel tank 0 with the right tank dropping fast, multiple flight control surfaces damaged, the left engine gone and the right engine showing abnormal indications. They were flying a wounded bird barely staying airborne. The captain tried to speak but coughed violently, his body shuddering. He looked at the senior flight attendant. "Check the passenger manifest. Seat 21A. I saw it when reviewing the list before departure. Sarah Mitchell, airline pilot credentials flagged in the system. I remembered because it's unusual to have another captain as a passenger." He coughed again, grip weakening. "I was going to invite her to visit the cockpit. Never got the chance." Sarah felt a chill. He had known she was aboard. Had seen her credentials in the system. And now, dying, he was transferring command. The senior flight attendant pulled out her tablet and confirmed it. "Sarah Mitchell, seat 21A, all credentials verified." The captain turned to look directly at Sarah, eyes focusing with tremendous effort. Blood pooled beneath his seat. He had minutes at most. "You're rated on this aircraft?" "Yes sir," Sarah said firmly. "I can fly it. I can get us down." He nodded slightly, the movement taking all his remaining strength. "Aircraft is badly damaged. Right engine might fail. Controls barely responding. Pittsburgh 30 miles ahead. You'll have to fly manually, automation is compromised." He paused, gasping. "I can't do it anymore. I'm done. You need to take over. You need to save these people." Sarah understood. This was emergency command transfer, something she trained for but never experienced. A dying captain handing control to someone capable of completing the mission. "I accept command," Sarah said formally. "I will get us safely on the ground." Relief flooded the captain's features. He had done his duty, found someone capable, transferred responsibility. Now he could let go. He looked at Sarah one final time and spoke with absolute clarity despite the blood in his mouth. "You're the pilot now." His hand fell from the controls and his head slumped forward. The senior flight attendant checked for a pulse, but Sarah could see he was gone. The captain had held on just long enough to transfer command, then death claimed him. No time for grief. Sarah was the pilot now, as ordered, and she had an aircraft to fly and 300 souls to save. She squeezed into the left seat beside the captain's body, strapped in, adjusted the seat, and took the yoke with her left hand while her right moved to the throttle. The aircraft felt wrong immediately. Controls mushy, delayed, requiring much more input than normal. The damaged left wing created asymmetric lift, making the aircraft want to roll left constantly. Sarah had to hold steady right aileron just to keep wings level. The rudder was barely functional. She glanced at hydraulics. System A completely dead, System B at 30%, System C fluctuating. The backup system was online but could only power essential controls. She keyed the radio. "Pittsburgh approach, United 447, emergency declared. We have lost both pilots to injuries. I am a qualified passenger pilot who has assumed command per the captain's final orders. We need immediate vectors and priority handling. We have multiple hydraulic failures, structural damage, and the remaining engine showing abnormal indications." A pause, then a calm voice. "United 447, Pittsburgh approach copies. We have you on radar 32 miles northeast, turn left heading 210, descend and maintain 6,000, the field is being cleared, runway 28 left is being prepared, all emergency equipment rolling, souls on board and fuel remaining." Sarah checked displays. 312 souls, 1,800 pounds fuel remaining in the right tank, maybe 5 to 10 minutes before flameout. United 447, understood, turn further left heading 180, cleared direct to the airport, descend at your discretion. Sarah banked left, feeling the sluggish response, the controls fighting her. Behind her, flight attendants moved the captain's body and tended to the unconscious first officer. Patricia, the senior flight attendant, remained. "What can I do?" "Make an announcement," Sarah said steadily. "Tell them we have an experienced pilot at the controls, don't say I was a passenger. Tell them emergency landing in Pittsburgh in 10 minutes, prepare for possible rough landing. Everyone in brace position, cabin completely secured." Patricia left to make the announcement. Sarah heard her voice over the intercom, calm and professional, delivering terrifying information but giving passengers hope. Sarah blocked it out and focused entirely on flying. 6,000 feet. 5,000. She descended carefully, aware the damaged aircraft might behave unpredictably. Airspeed holding at 220 knots, faster than she wanted but necessary for controllability with degraded systems. The right engine was running hot, probably damaged by debris. She might lose at any moment. United 447, turn right heading 260, you're 7 miles from the outer marker, cleared ILS approach runway 28 left, contact tower 118.3. Sarah switched frequencies. Pittsburgh Tower, United 447 heavy, 7 miles out, emergency aircraft, passenger pilot flying, we need full runway length, minimal control authority, may not stop in normal distance. United 447, cleared to land runway 28 left, 11,000 feet available, wind 270 at 8, all emergency equipment standing by. We'll take all the runway you've got, Sarah responded. She was hand-flying the approach, unable to trust the damaged autopilot. Her eyes moved constantly between instruments and the view ahead. The airport was visible, runway lights forming a perfect line. She was slightly high, slightly fast, but accepting those deviations rather than aggressive corrections that might upset the delicate balance. 4 miles. 3. The landing gear needed to come down. Sarah pulled the gear lever. Normally 3 green lights would indicate gear down and locked. She only got 2. The left main gear wasn't indicating down and locked. She cycled the handle. Still two green lights. Tower, United 447, gear problem, left main not showing down and locked, trying manual extension. She pulled the backup gear extension handle, a mechanical system using gravity and springs. She heard mechanical clunking. The two green lights remained. The left main indicator stayed dark. Either it wasn't down, or the indicator was broken. No way to know until touchdown. 2 miles. The runway was clear in sight, a long gray strip surrounded by green fields. The approach lights marched toward them. She made minor corrections, fighting damaged controls, keeping wings level. Altitude decreasing. 2,000 feet, 1,500, 1,000. The right engine coughed. Sarah felt it instantly, the subtle power loss. She glanced at fuel. Less than 200 pounds. Running on fumes. The engine coughed again, RPM dropping. They were losing it before the runway. Tower, United 447, losing the remaining engine, no power for go-around, this is our only chance. United 447, understood, 1 mile from threshold, you can make it. 800 feet. 600. The engine was surging and dying, surging and dying. Sarah added what throttle remained, coaxing a few more seconds from the failing turbine. The runway was right there, tantalizingly close, but they were sinking faster than she wanted. 500 feet. 400. The runway threshold passed beneath them. She was over pavement now, just barely. The engine quit completely, the final death rattle as it ran out of fuel and seized. Now they were a glider, a 300-ton glider with damaged controls and questionable landing gear, and Sarah had one chance. 300 feet. 200. She pulled the throttle to idle though the engine was already dead. Her hand moved to the speed brake lever, ready to deploy spoilers the instant wheels touched. The ground rushed up. 100 feet. 50. She started the flare, pulling back gently, raising the nose, bleeding airspeed. The right main gear touched first, a solid thump. Then the nose gear, harder than she wanted but acceptable. The left side dropped and there was horrific grinding as metal scraped concrete. The left main gear was not down. The wing was touching runway, grinding along pavement, throwing sparks and smoke. Sarah deployed speed brakes and stood on the right brake, the only brake she had with the left side dragging. The aircraft slewed left, skidding on collapsed gear, the wing grinding deeper. She fought with rudder and nose while steering, trying to keep them straight, prevent a spin that would tear them apart. The noise was incredible, metal screaming, brakes howling, the entire structure shaking. They were slowing. 800 feet of runway gone, 1,000, 1,500. Speed brakes helping, right brake helping, friction from collapsed gear helping. 2,000, 2,500, 3,000. Still moving too fast but deceleration increasing. 4,000, 5,000. She could see the end of runway approaching and they still had too much speed. 6,000, 7,000. Finally, mercifully, they were slowing to controllable speeds. 8,000 feet gone, down to 40 knots, then 30, then 20. At 9,000 feet the aircraft stopped completely, sitting crooked with the left wing crumpled and smoking, fuel and hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the wreckage, but they were stopped and down and alive. Sarah sat motionless for 3 seconds, hands still gripping controls, body shaking with adrenaline. Then training took over. She pulled fire handles for both engines, cutting fuel, preventing fire. She shut down electrical, hydraulics, everything that could spark. Through the windscreen she saw emergency vehicles racing toward them. Patricia appeared in the doorway. Evacuate? Sarah nodded. Evacuate. All exits clear of collapsed gear and fuel spill. Go. Patricia turned and shouted orders. Emergency exits began opening, slides deploying, passengers already moving toward them with organized panic. Sarah unbuckled and moved back into the cabin. The scene was controlled chaos. Passengers streaming toward exits, some crying, some silent with shock, all desperate to get off. Flight attendants at each exit shouting instructions, keeping flow moving, preventing anyone from taking bags. Sarah joined them, helping passengers onto slides, catching those who stumbled, pushing those who froze. 3 minutes to empty the aircraft. 312 people down slides and running across runway toward buses pulled up at safe distance. Sarah was last off, following the final flight attendant down the slide and landing on concrete. She turned and looked back. The 777 sat broken on the runway, left wing collapsed, fuselage twisted, burn marks and fluid stains covering pavement around it. But the fuselage was intact. The cabin had not burned. The aircraft had protected its passengers until the final second. 312 people had walked away from disaster that should have killed them all. Paramedics tried to guide Sarah toward an ambulance. She pulled away gently. "I'm fine. Check the others. The pilots in the cockpit. Take care of them first. Ma'am, you need examination. You're in shock." "I'm a pilot," Sarah said steadily. "I know how I feel. I'm not injured. Take care of the others." She walked toward the buses where passengers were being loaded. As she approached, people recognized her from the cabin. The woman from across the aisle pointed. "That's her. She was sitting next to me. She was just a passenger." More passengers turned. The accountant from 21B stood up. "You told me you were between jobs. You said you didn't fly often. You were just reading a book." "I was taking a vacation," Sarah said simply. "I didn't plan on working today." Patricia pushed through the crowd and put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This woman saved every life on this aircraft. When both pilots went down, she stepped up and flew an aircraft falling apart around us. She landed with no engine power, no hydraulics, and landing gear that collapsed. She's a hero." The passengers erupted in applause, some crying with relief, others trying to reach Sarah to shake her hand or hug her. She accepted their gratitude quietly, still processing everything, still feeling the weight of the captain's final words echoing in her mind. "You're the pilot now." She had been the pilot. For 20 terrifying minutes she had been the only thing standing between 300 people and death. She had taken command when a dying man ordered her to, had accepted responsibility without hesitation, had used every skill learned over 15 years to bring them all home. The NTSB investigators arrived within the hour. Sarah was examined by doctors who confirmed no injuries beyond bruising and minor cuts. Then investigators sat her down for the first interview. She walked them through everything, from the first vibration to the final shutdown. She described the captain's condition, his final words, the emergency command transfer. She explained every decision, every input, every calculation while trying to save the aircraft. The investigators listened without interruption, understanding this would become one of the most analyzed incidents in aviation history. When she finished, the lead investigator, a gray-haired man named Collins, looked at her with admiration. "Captain Mitchell, your actions prevented what would have been one of the worst disasters in commercial aviation. Preliminary analysis suggests that aircraft should not have been flyable given the damage. The fact that you got it down with 0 fatalities is remarkable." "The captain deserves credit," Sarah said quietly. "He held on long enough to find me, to transfer command, to give us all a chance. He's the hero." Collins nodded. "We'll need you for the investigation. More interviews, debriefings, probably testimony. What you did today will change protocols for emergency situations." Sarah understood. Her quiet vacation was over. The anonymity of seat 21A was gone forever. By tomorrow her name would be on every news channel. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that 312 people would go home to their families. Children would hug parents, spouses would hold each other. Life would continue because a dying captain had looked at a passenger manifest and remembered the credentials of the woman in seat 21A. The investigation would reveal the full extent of what went wrong. The left engine had suffered catastrophic turbine disc failure, a manufacturing defect that went undetected until the metal gave way. The disintegrating engine threw debris everywhere, puncturing the fuselage in 17 places, severing hydraulic lines, rupturing fuel tanks, sending shrapnel through the cockpit that wounded both pilots. The right engine had been damaged but continued running on borrowed time until finally surrendering. Sarah thought about Captain Robert Chen, a 28-year veteran with 15,000 flight hours and a spotless record. 53 years old, married with 2 children. He had held on through unimaginable pain to save his passengers, had trusted a stranger to complete his mission, had died doing his duty. Sarah would attend his funeral and try to find words for what his sacrifice meant. She thought about the first officer, Marcus Webb, being treated for severe concussion and facial lacerations but expected to recover fully. He had been knocked unconscious before he could even process what was happening, would wake to learn a passenger had landed the aircraft. She thought about Patricia and the other flight attendants who stayed calm when everything fell apart, who helped in the cockpit and evacuated 300 people in under 3 minutes. They were unsung heroes of every flight, taken for granted until their training and courage meant the difference between life and death. And she thought about the passengers who boarded expecting routine travel and experienced the longest 20 minutes of their lives. They would carry this forever. Some would never fly again. Others would find renewed appreciation for every moment, would hug loved ones tighter, would stop taking tomorrow for granted. All would remember the woman from seat 21A who had been reading a novel until a dying captain's final words transformed her into their only hope. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a training facility watching flight attendants practice new emergency protocols. They were learning to quickly identify passengers with pilot credentials, coordinate command transfers, support qualified passengers who might need to assist in cockpits during emergencies. The program was named the Chen Protocol in honor of Captain Robert Chen, being implemented by airlines worldwide. Sarah thought about seat 21A where this all began, reading her book and enjoying anonymity. That life seemed to belong to someone else now, someone who existed before she heard those final words. "You're the pilot now." Those words had changed everything, had called her to a test she had trained for her entire career without knowing it would ever come. Patricia was helping run the training program. She saw Sarah watching and came over. "Do you ever think about flying again? As a captain?" Sarah considered. She had thought about it many times. The feel of controls in her hands, the responsibility of command, the satisfaction of bringing passengers safely to destination. She missed it. But she could never fly without thinking about Captain Chen, without remembering that terrible day, without carrying the weight of what happened. "Maybe someday," Sarah said. "Right now this work feels more important. Making sure other crews are prepared. Making sure Captain Chen's sacrifice leads to positive change." The passengers from Flight 447 had created a group meeting annually on the landing anniversary. They called themselves the 21A Society, named after her seat. They invited Sarah to the first gathering. Nearly 200 people attended, coming from everywhere, united by shared experience of surviving the unsurvivable. Sarah walked in and was surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, hug her, tell her what her actions meant. The accountant from 21B was there with his wife and children. The woman from across the aisle with her elderly mother. Dozens of others, each with their own story. They shared a meal, told stories, laughed and cried and remembered. Many had struggled with aftermath, nightmares and anxiety and fear of flying. But they had all survived. They had all been given a second chance because a dying captain looked at a passenger manifest and found the one person who could save them. Someone asked Sarah to say a few words. She stood reluctantly but understood these people needed to hear from her. "I've been asked how I felt when Captain Chen told me I was the pilot," Sarah began. "The truth is, I felt terrified. Not because I didn't think I could fly the aircraft, but because I understood what was at stake. Your lives. All 312 of you depending on me to make the right decisions. She paused. I had trained my entire career for emergencies. I had practiced failures countless times in simulators. But nothing truly prepares you for sitting in that cockpit with a dying captain beside you, knowing that if you make one mistake, everyone dies. The room was silent. What got me through was remembering my training, trusting my skills, and refusing to give up. But also, I kept thinking about all of you. I could hear you in the cabin. I knew you were scared, praying, hoping, trusting someone would save you. That responsibility gave me strength. Sarah looked around. You call yourselves the 21A Society. But that name represents something bigger than a seat number. It represents the idea that any of us can be called upon to be more than we think we are. That we all have capabilities inside us that we don't discover until circumstances demand we rise to a challenge. She felt emotion welling up. Captain Chen's last thoughts were not about himself. They were about saving all of you. His final words gave me the authority and responsibility to act. I will carry those words for the rest of my life. You're the pilot now. They transformed me from a passenger into the person who had to save us all. I will be forever grateful that I was able to honor his trust. The room erupted in applause, people standing, many crying. A young girl approached Sarah shyly. She was maybe 10, one of the unaccompanied minors from Flight 447. She held out a folded paper. Sarah took it and unfolded a crayon drawing. It showed an airplane on a runway with fire trucks and a stick figure with long brown hair in the cockpit. At the top, "Thank you for saving my life so I could live with Aunt Mary and be happy again." Sarah knelt to eye level with the girl. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Emma, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has given me." "Thank you. Can I ask you something? Are you happy now?" Emma smiled genuinely. "Yes. Aunt Mary is really nice. If the plane had crashed, I wouldn't have gotten to know her. So I'm really glad you were there." Sarah hugged her gently. "I'm glad too, Emma. You live a wonderful life, okay? I will. Maybe someday I'll be a pilot like you. I think you'd make an excellent pilot." Sarah left the gathering and drove toward the airport. She needed to see it again, to stand on that runway and remember what it felt like to bring that aircraft down, to fight the controls, to refuse to give up. She parked near the perimeter fence and walked until she could see runway 28 left clearly. The same runway where she had landed. She stood in darkness and closed her eyes and felt the memory wash over her. The fear, the adrenaline, the absolute focus. The captain's dying voice. The weight of responsibility. The determination to succeed because failure meant death. And then the moment when wheels touched and she knew they were going to make it. When the aircraft ground to a stop and she could breathe. When 312 people evacuated safely and she realized she had done it. She had been the pilot, as Captain Chen ordered. She had saved them all. A Delta flight landed, touching down smoothly on the same concrete where Flight 447 had scraped and survived. The routine normalcy made her smile. That was what aviation was supposed to be. Routine. Safe. Predictable. Flight 447 had been the exception, the nightmare every pilot trained for but prayed would never happen. And when it did, someone had been there with the skills to save it. Not because she planned to be a hero. Not because she wanted recognition. But because she was a pilot who happened to be in seat 21A on the day when a dying captain needed someone capable of finishing his mission. She would carry that responsibility, that honor, that terrible beautiful burden for the rest of her life. She would use it to make aviation safer, to train the next generation, to ensure lessons from Flight 447 would protect future passengers. Because that was what pilots did. They learned from every flight, every emergency, every close call. They took experiences and transformed them into knowledge that made the entire system better. Captain Chen had done that with his final act. And Sarah Mitchell would do it too, honoring his memory by dedicating herself to keeping people safe in the skies. She turned from the runway and walked back to her car, Emma's drawing carefully folded in her pocket, the memories of Flight 447 forever etched in her mind. She had been just a passenger in seat 21A, anonymous and unremarkable, until 4 words from a dying man changed everything. "You're the pilot now." And she had been. She would always be. Not just on that terrible day over Pennsylvania, but for the rest of her life, carrying the responsibility and the pride and the sorrow of having saved 312 lives because a captain she barely knew had trusted her with his dying breath. The media attention had been overwhelming in the weeks following the incident. News crews camped outside her hotel, reporters calling constantly, talk shows offering enormous sums for exclusive interviews. Everyone wanted to hear the story from her own lips, wanted to understand what it felt like to be thrust from anonymity into the cockpit of a dying aircraft. Sarah had declined most requests, uncomfortable with the spotlight, still processing the trauma of that day. But she had agreed to one interview, a quiet sit-down with a respected aviation journalist who promised to focus on the technical aspects rather than sensationalism. During that conversation, Sarah had been asked what she thought about when she was fighting to save Flight 447. Her answer had been simple and honest. "I thought about Captain Chen's family who would lose him no matter what I did. I thought about the first officer who couldn't help because he was unconscious. I thought about Patricia and the flight attendants doing their jobs perfectly despite the terror they must have felt. And I thought about Emma and all the other passengers who had their whole lives ahead of them. I couldn't let them down. I couldn't let Captain Chen's sacrifice be in vain." The journalist had asked if she blamed herself for not being able to save the captain. Sarah had paused for a long moment before answering. Every pilot who has lost a crew member asks that question. Could I have done something different? Could I have saved them? The truth is that Captain Chen's injuries were unsurvivable from the moment that shrapnel hit him. The doctors confirmed he should have lost consciousness within seconds from the blood loss and shock. But he held on for over 5 minutes, kept flying, kept thinking about his passengers, kept searching for a solution. He used the last of his strength to find me and transfer command. He made a conscious choice to sacrifice his remaining moments to save everyone else. I honor that choice by not second-guessing it, by accepting the responsibility he gave me, and by making sure his death led to changes that will protect future passengers. The airline had offered Sarah any position she wanted. She could return to the cockpit as a senior captain with her choice of routes and aircraft. She could work in management, helping shape safety policies and training programs. She could become a spokesperson, representing the airline at conferences and events. The offers were generous and sincere, recognition of what she had done and acknowledgement that having her associated with the airline was valuable both practically and symbolically. Sarah had chosen to work behind the scenes, consulting on safety protocols and emergency procedures. She helped design new training scenarios that incorporated lessons from Flight 447. She worked with aircraft manufacturers to improve emergency systems and backup controls. She met with regulatory agencies to discuss command transfer protocols and passenger pilot utilization during emergencies. The work was important and meaningful, allowing her to channel her experience into concrete improvements without constantly reliving the trauma in public. But she also made time for the survivors. The 21A Society had become more than just an annual gathering. It had evolved into a support network for people dealing with the psychological aftermath of the incident. Many passengers struggled with post-traumatic stress, experiencing nightmares and panic attacks, developing fear of flying that threatened to limit their lives. Sarah attended support group meetings, sharing her own struggles with processing what had happened, offering perspective from someone who understood the technical realities of what they had survived. She learned about the ripple effects of that day in ways that both humbled and inspired her. The accountant from Seat 21B had quit his corporate job and started a non-profit helping underprivileged children get aviation education, inspired by how Sarah's skills had saved his life. The woman from across the aisle had reconciled with an estranged daughter, realizing life was too short for unresolved conflicts. A businessman who had been traveling to close a deal that would have cost hundreds of jobs had instead restructured the company to save those positions, his priorities fundamentally shifted by his brush with death. Emma, the young girl who had given Sarah the crayon drawing, had started taking flying lessons on her 12th birthday. Her aunt had sent Sarah a video of Emma's first solo flight, the girl's face radiating pure joy as she landed the small Cessna and climbed out to celebrate with her instructor. In the video, Emma had looked directly at the camera and said, "Thank you, Captain Mitchell, for showing me that women can do anything, even save a whole airplane full of people when nobody expects them to." 2 years after the incident, Sarah received an invitation to speak at the Air Force Academy graduation ceremony. Standing before hundreds of young cadets about to receive their wings, she told them about Seat 21A. She explained how all her years of training, all the simulator sessions and emergency procedures and countless hours of flight time, had prepared her for 20 minutes that would define her entire career. She talked about the weight of command and the responsibility that came with accepting authority over other people's lives. Captain Robert Chen could have panicked when he realized he was dying, Sarah told the cadets. He could have frozen, could have given up, could have thought only about himself. Instead, he used his final moments to save his passengers. He searched for a solution when there seemed to be none. He found me in that passenger manifest and he trusted me with the most important mission of his life. That trust, that faith in a fellow pilot he had never met, gave me the strength to do what needed to be done. She paused, looking out at the young faces staring back at her with rapt attention. Some of you will go on to fly fighters, some will pilot transport aircraft, some will become instructors or test pilots. Whatever path you choose, remember this: being a pilot is not about the hours you log or the aircraft you fly. It's about the responsibility you accept every time you take the controls. It's about the trust that passengers, crew members, and fellow aviators place in you. It's about being ready when everything goes wrong, when there are no good options, when you are the only thing standing between people and disaster. Captain Chen was ready. When my moment came, I was ready too. I hope you will be ready when your moment comes, whatever form it takes. The cadets had given her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of them had lined up to shake her hand, to tell her she was the reason they wanted to fly, to promise they would live up to the example she and Captain Chen had set. Sarah had felt the weight of that responsibility but also the pride of knowing that their story would inspire the next generation of aviators to be better, to train harder, to never give up when lives depended on them. On the 3rd anniversary of Flight 447, the city of Pittsburgh dedicated a memorial at the airport. It was a simple stone monument engraved with the names of Captain Robert Chen and First Officer Marcus Webb, who had recovered from his injuries but had chosen to retire from flying, the trauma too great to overcome. The monument also bore a plaque describing what had happened that day and honoring the courage of the crew and passengers who had survived. Sarah stood at the dedication ceremony alongside Marcus, Patricia, and dozens of survivors from the 21A Society. The governor spoke about heroism and sacrifice. The airline CEO talked about safety improvements implemented because of Flight 447. The NTSB investigator Collins presented findings from the final report, confirming that Sarah's actions had been the only reason the aircraft had survived at all. When Sarah was asked to speak, she walked to the podium and stood silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. 3 years ago, I boarded a flight as a passenger. I was going on vacation, planning to read my book and relax and let someone else do the flying. I had no idea that a few hours later I would be sitting in a cockpit with a dying captain beside me, taking command of an aircraft that was falling apart, trying to save 312 lives with skills I had trained for but never expected to actually use. She looked at the memorial stone, at Captain Chen's name carved into granite. What happened that day changed all of us. For the passengers, it was a reminder of how fragile life is and how quickly everything can change. For the aviation industry, it was a wake-up call about emergency preparedness and the importance of having backup plans for scenarios we hope will never occur. For me personally, it was the moment I discovered what I was truly capable of when everything was on the line. Sarah turned back to the crowd. But the real hero of Flight 447 was Captain Robert Chen. He was dying, in terrible pain, watching his aircraft disintegrate around him. He could have given up. Instead, he thought about his passengers. He searched for a way to save them. He found me and he gave me 4 words that changed my life forever: "You're the pilot now." Those words were a command, a transfer of authority, and a statement of faith all rolled into one. He trusted me to finish what he could not. He believed in me when I barely had time to believe in myself. And because of that trust, 312 people went home to their families that night. She felt tears forming but pushed through. "Captain Chen, if you can hear me wherever you are, I want you to know that I did my best to honor your trust. I got them down safely. I saved everyone I could save. And I have spent every day since then trying to make sure your sacrifice meant something, that it led to changes that will protect other passengers and other crews. You were the real pilot that day. I just finished the job you started. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for showing all of us what true courage looks like." The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, and then people began coming up to Sarah once again, shaking her hand, hugging her, thanking her. She accepted their gratitude with the same quiet grace she always had, deflecting praise, redirecting credit to Captain Chen and the flight attendants and the emergency responders who had helped save lives that day. As the crowd dispersed and people began heading to their cars, Sarah stood alone at the memorial for a few minutes. She traced Captain Chen's name with her finger, feeling the cold stone, thinking about a man she had known for less than 10 minutes but who had impacted her life more profoundly than anyone except her own parents. She thought about his widow, whom she had met several times since the incident, and his children who were both in college now, studying aviation because they wanted to honor their father's legacy. "I'm still flying for you," Sarah whispered to the memorial. "Every day. Every decision I make. Every pilot I help train. Every safety protocol I help improve. I'm still your pilot, still finishing the mission you gave me. And I will be until the day I die." She stepped back, saluted the memorial the way she had been taught in the Air Force, and walked away. Tomorrow she would return to work, to the endless task of making aviation safer. Next month she would attend another 21A Society gathering. Next year there would be another anniversary, another opportunity to remember and honor what had happened. The story of Flight 447 would never truly end, would continue rippling outward, touching lives and inspiring changes for decades to come. But tonight, Sarah would go home and sit quietly with Emma's drawing on her wall and remember what it felt like to be just a passenger in seat 21A, reading her book, enjoying her anonymity. That version of herself seemed impossibly distant now, like a person from another lifetime. The woman she had become was forged in fire and terror and the dying words of a captain who had trusted her with everything. "You're the pilot now." She had been. She still was. She always would be.